Hi everyone, welcome to the latest monologue, and this is the second in the conservation bullshit series. Today, the bullshit term we're dealing with is empowerment. Empowerment is a very commonly used term in conservation. It started in other social or development spheres a lot earlier, but in conservation it really took hold in early 21st century, maybe 20 years ago. Now, the empowerment, and it was never empowerment of communities as a whole in conservation. In conservation, it was always empowerment of fragments of communities. And by that I mean youth empowerment and women's empowerment, particularly the one of women. They've been very strong. The so-called development partners have been very strong on the one of women. And one would ask why. I mean, when we talk of conservation, we are talking of natural resources, we are talking of wildlife, we are talking of ecosystem services, etc. What has that got to do with gender? And the answer is nothing. The reason why this fragmentation and empowerment has gotten into conservation is because one thing is very vexatious to Western imperialism. That is the cohesion and resilience of African societies, and probably other societies, other parts of the global south. But I'm talking about African societies because I'm African and I'm in Africa. That's what I know most about. It's a it's a vexing issue to them because they cannot understand why we are not starving to death, why we are not dying out, how we are still resilient, and how we somehow use the resources, we share resources without killing each other. How are we not capitalist in our approach to natural resources? So in order to, this equilibrium vexes them because you cannot easily take resources away from a society that is cohesive, that lives in some kind of equilibrium. So the big march was first to come in and convince women in African societies that you are oppressed. You are oppressed. There is a problem. You are this and that is taken away from you. Those of us who've grown up in African societies, we know that women hold it together. Regardless what they tell you out there, we know women hold it together. Those of us brought up in African societies. Later, I know this from my own personal life, but later in my professional life, I worked with a lot of rural communities where women they wouldn't speak in meetings. In community meetings and all that, they wouldn't speak, but their voices would be heard. None of the men who routinely speak in these meetings would ever come out and say, Mama amekata, or my wife says no. He'd never say that. But when there's something that the wife doesn't like, he'd just say, oh, hiyo ni ngumu. It's saying it's difficult. So there's ways they'd apply that. In the pastoralist societies where I worked, there would be harsh, dry seasons where the men would routinely go to look for pasture or market for livestock miles and miles, tens of miles away, and they'd be away for weeks on end. And during that period, the women would hold it together. The old livestock that are not able to walk that distance, the young, very young calves or kids or lambs that weren't able to go, would all remain at home. And the young human children as well would remain at home in this toughest of times. And the women would hold that together. You cannot overstate the power of women in these societies. But in order, if one is to come in the way the Nature Conservancy, Soils for Africa, and all these other conservation capitalists organizations come in, if you're to take over someone's land, or their natural resources, be it a forest, be it a river and all that, you first have to fracture that society. You have to convince the women that you are oppressed. You need, there's some language they call income generating activities, because they have to try and monetize things even at domestic level. So the woman is or the women are recruited into projects like beadwork, where they spend hours for earning a pittance. But the key thing is not the money. The key thing is to get them away from home for hours, and remove their power or labor from the area of keeping the family together, from the area of maintaining the homesteads, and from the area of presence on the land. I hope this is sort of clear. So while they're busy doing beadwork, say this is a women's project, the men should not, we are giving these loans particularly to women, the men should not be involved in this, that, the other. That causes the fracture in society. Then shortly, there's no one to care of the livestock at home. So suddenly pastoralism becomes unworkable. Suddenly the patterns which were there and have existed for thousands of years are fractured. Now you have a society that's ready to be exploited. The men are called aside. Now we are sitting to make an agreement. Here's some beer, here's some cash handouts, per diems. We are giving you loans even to buy motorcycles and this kind of things. And here's some cash handouts. We need you to sign this 40-year agreement that will give us control of this land, and you won't be able to graze it anymore. Well, the men will sign it, because the considerations in whether you sign such an agreement are: is the family going to be okay? How are we going to survive without being able to use this land? But you've already been, the women have already been given their own project. They are okay. They're making money, which they're not. They're making money. They're busy in the beadwork project and with this development, this, that, the other. And in the same time, under the guise of these income generating activities, they bring in what is euphemistically called reproductive health services. I won't talk about the other sectors, but in the conservation world, anyone talking about reproductive health services is talking about birth control. And this is part of conservation work only in Africa, nowhere else in the world that I know of. And that's how this society gets fractured, creating some strange activities and non-existent roles that don't empower women, but they remove them from their position that they held in the society, the power that they held in society. Something like a particularly stupid one is this creation of female rangers squads. When you take this young lady and make her a ranger, she's not, first of all, she's not a ranger, because they're not, the ones I know are not even armed ranger squads. Ranger work is not easy work. And there are women rangers in many places who are armed rangers, and I mean like even KWS, etc. Even in our police, we have police officers, armed police officers who are women. So it's something women are capable of. But this one is just to remove them, to remove them from their place in this society. If you are serious about getting a woman into being a wildlife ranger, take her and sponsor her to go for a ranger training course at KWS and let her be posted wherever, somewhere in Chimba Hills or wherever park, whichever wildlife park KWS might choose to post her in. Because habitually in Kenya, when KWS recruits rangers or any law enforcement, you're never posted in your home area, because of obvious reasons. You've got your friends, relatives, enemies, etc. in this place, so which might compromise your duties. But these ones are taken, they're given uniforms and given some random notebooks to collect data on elephant dung and all sorts of funny things. And they're given some green uniforms, and they're constantly being photographed and put on the cover of glossy reports, smiling about how empowered they are. what is done is the complete opposite. And there's no good intention of this. On a global scale, have you been reading about global moves to conserve the blue economy? This is the marine economy, and to control sea pollution, extractive activities from the oceans, etc., etc., etc. But the only part, suddenly, the part that concerns that concerns Africa, there's what we call WIOMSA, the Western Indian Ocean Management, whatever. That's the part that the Western Indian Ocean, that's the coast of East Africa. Suddenly, this part contains a component of women. How do women relate to the ocean or blue economy different from men or children? And you have this thing even all over with the so-called climate movement. In Africa is the one place you find women are, you hear all these ridiculous, and I repeat, ridiculous claims that women are worse affected by climate change than men. And it's only talked about in Africa. And it's pushed relentlessly. And they employ African women and pay them very well to advance this narrative. And this is, I'm all happy about African women or men or anyone getting professional advancement, but I repeat this here that the most powerful mascot of imperialism has become the black African woman, because it's the farthest you can get away from the old white man who is driving this agenda. And they are powerful because you put an African woman, because of the way African society is civilized, it's very hard for us to oppose something, to really fight something when the person at the front is our sister. It's just how we are. And when you're doing birth control programs, put a black woman in charge. Any woman who feels this is unfair will go, and suddenly she'll see her sister there. A man who feels uncomfortable about this will go there and he'll see his sister there. If he's an old man, he'll see his daughter there. He's the one pushing birth control. And this is what's going on. It's just the fragmentation of society. They're not, the Western imperialism is very, very sexist. There's no time Western imperialism has ever been interested in the empowerment of women. Even in their own countries, they can't be interested in it here. I mean, I see so many programs in Kenya, especially the reproductive health. One of the biggest supporters of this is Denmark, which has been supporting this since the 1960s, and have put a lot of it into a lot of money into this over the years. But if you read the history of Denmark, until the 1990s, Denmark was forcibly sterilizing Inuit women in Greenland. Until the 1990s, some of those victims of sterilization are just in their 30s today, are just finding out now that they have not been able to have babies because they were forcibly implanted with IUDs when they were children. And this is the country supporting women's empowerment in Kenya. I can go across many examples from many other countries. So let's not let Johnny come latelys upset the equilibrium that we have, because that equilibrium of ours is what disturbs the spirit of the West, the Western imperialist. The equilibrium we have between men, women, children in our society, it's not perfect, but it's the oldest in the world. Remember, East Africa is the cradle of mankind. The equilibrium we have between us and our wild animals, it's not perfect, but it's the oldest in the world. This is the cradle of mankind. We've been here with the wild animals for 1.2 million years, if not more. We cannot become a problem to the wild animals in 2025. These are ideas brought to fragment what we have. And the problem, I speak as a Kenyan, The problem is that Kenya is a client state. Kenya has no policy on anything in any direction. Our policy and mantra is wait for the West to tell you what they want and do it to your the best of your ability. In education, in conservation, in policy, environmental policy, and all these kind of things. So the other thing is this strange thing about the same fragmentation. We keep talking about youth, this, youth, that. Youth is a phase of life. Youth is not a merit. Youth is not a fault. It's a phase of life. It's a season of life. So when someone seeks to fragment a section of the population based on their age, it's the most ridiculous thing. You hear things. I even saw we end up always facing crisis. There are people who are empowered, uplifted, or whatever as youth. Then suddenly they face crisis when they grow older. I think the random definition of youth is something of like 35 years and below. You find these people who are approaching 40 and they're facing an existential crisis. I'm no longer youthful, and I've spent all my years being a youth leader in this, that, the other. It prevents you from growing up. And maturity is the biggest crisis, social crisis we face in Kenya today. I know of even conservation. We have an organization called Youth for Conservation, and I know a few years ago I was seeing the head. I won't mention his name, but the head of it was slightly older than me, and I was looking at him and wondering, what's this guy doing Youth for Conservation when I'm not youthful myself. I mean, by that time I'd even finished my PhD, and he was my age mate, and he's in Youth for Conservation. These are the problems. The youth do not have any role in the environment that's different from anyone else's. Everyone must take care of the environment. The youth, the elderly, the women, the children, everybody. And that's why you should tell your 2-year-old kid not to throw his sweet wrapper on the ground, or your 4-year-old kid. Just as you should tell your old grandfather not to take his drink and throw the bottle out the window. It's the same. It's the same environment. We don't live in different worlds. We don't exist in different realms. So we should not be told that we are somehow different from each other. These are just schemes to fragment our society so that they can access our resources. Don't for 1 second think that the Western imperialist cares about you as a sector of this population. They just care about you in as much as you can help them fragment your wider society. Think about that. And remember, environment, there's no sun that shines hotter on women or children. And there's this mantra that Africa is most affected by climate change. You think cyclones, storms, tsunamis, think of how many of them are in Africa and how many are in Asia and the Americas. And get back to me on that. Good day to everyone.